Oh, I hate to even bring this up, but is the US on the brink of another civil war? And, oh, that's not boring. Uh, the question was posed in a CNN op-ed by Bruce Hoffman and Jacob Ware, both scholars. Bruce Hoffman is a very famous scholar, he's on 3 editions of a book called Inside Terrorism, and Jacob Ware studies right-wing terrorism in the United States or right now and what's going on now. So they, just to try to bottom line up front this, in their CNN op-ed, they look at all the people predicting a civil war in the U.S. and go through. So the first half of it is them bringing out quotes of this person says it, and then after teasing you with all that, they kind of pivot and say, well, we don't think that's going to happen, right? Because there's not a geographic boundary, et cetera, et cetera. They have reasons for it. And they say what they think is more important. The terrorism experts say what they think is more likely is Northern Ireland style terrorism, right? Like the IRA, and they make comparisons to that. And so they leave us with that as their answer, that it might happen. And honestly, my take on this, just to bottom line it, is that I don't think they have a basis for making that, right, in their research, unless I'm missing something, because they don't look at whether or not it occurs. They don't look across cases, they look within. So that's the real, right? That's the minute 30-second answer. To take a deeper dive, what am I saying here? Look, if you want to explain whether or not something occurs, the or not part's really important. You need to have a number of cases, and you need to look at when, if you want to explain when terrorism occurs, you have to say, okay, it occurs in these cases and not in these others. What's the difference between them, right? That's just kind of basically the scientific method. We need to have a number of cases, degrees of freedom, whatever you want to call it. We have to have variation in what we're trying to explain in order to explain it, right? You have to see variation in what you're doing. And it's kind of like, if you go to jail, if you go and interview people convicted of crimes, you'll learn a lot about criminals, you learn a lot about crime, but you won't learn about when crime occurs or not. That's why I always throw the or not in there, right? Because you haven't got, all you've got are criminals, right? And you're like, all right, I found that these are the things common in these criminals, right? So maybe trying to say, okay, what makes someone commit a crime or not? Well, if you study only people who've committed crimes, you don't know how they differ from the people who haven't, right? So you need to study both. And so with terrorist movements, I'm always like, look, you need to have that cross section, and you need to do research like Max Abrams has done, right? He's done research into it, and he gets very different results. He's very, he says, look, these terrorist organizations very often fail, right? The most common thing that happens is they fail, and they have a lot of difficulty doing things. And he's, because he focuses on all of them, right? And you're able to ask questions about a large number of cases if you have more advanced research methods, you do statistics, that sort of thing. And the reason that you go to that level, even though a lot of people think it's hokey, is simply because you can look at this cross-section. And so, my thing is like, okay, give me some arguments based on that type of research and I'm on board. Now what do I think, right? My reaction to their thing is like, well, I just started thinking of all the reasons that the U.S. isn't Northern Ireland. Primarily, there were British troops deployed that were, it looked like a more classic case of a movement. And I don't see that parallel in the United States. And I also think anecdotally, Timothy McVeigh, right? He blew up, he had this kind of this militia. We had a militia movement in the 90s, and it didn't survive the first act of violence, right? The Oklahoma City bombing. And, the immediate aftermath of January 6th was not popularity, right? Now we've got concerns that it's been normalized by this point. But, my point is that, hey, if we look at the research, more often than not, terrorist groups bring down righteous wrath upon themselves. There are, of course, examples of groups that did not do that, but that is more often the case. So if someone was to commit some horrendous act of violence in the United States, it would probably have a backlash on them, right? And so, to my mind, these guys haven't explained why the backlash wouldn't occur in that case, right? And so, I'm skeptical, right? I mean, this, and again, I'm not going to reject everything they say. We don't do that, right? What we bring up, all right, but what about this? That's not whataboutism, right? We say, have you considered this, right? That and let's talk about what this might mean. And so that's where we need to be with this, and that is the boring AF analysis.